unless we get this structural reform, we're always going to have this torment of powerlessness.
I do really think resilience is a muscle, and if you work it, it gets stronger, and I gave that muscle a fairly good workout.
The fundamental basis of this shift begins with people with disability being recognised as rights bearers, not passive recipients of care and protection.
Good evening. My name is Rosalind Dixon, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you this evening to a conversation with Johann Hari about his very exciting and wonderful new book, Stolen Focus, Why You Can't Pay Attention. We're hoping that you'll be able to pay attention for at least some of the next 60 minutes, because it really is a fascinating read. Tonight, this is an event brought to you by the UNSW Centre for Ideas. But before we begin our conversation with Johann, I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we're coming to you this evening from Bidjigal land and pay respect to elders past, present and emerging, and to all Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander listeners and colleagues joining us this evening. I also want to lend my voice to the calls for structural change to the Constitution to entrench a First Nation voice to Parliament. Johann, welcome to UNSW.
I'm so happy to be here. Cheers, Ros.
Many people have read your work previously and are very excited to hear about this new book, which is just an amazing sort of engagement with neuroscience, psychology, the expertise of how we think, how we concentrate, and tells us a lot about where we are as a country and a global society today. Before I ask you about the book, though, I want to introduce you a little bit more fully to our readers and listeners. Johann's a best-selling writer and journalist who's written for the New York Times, Le Monde, The Guardian and other newspapers. You may have read some of his other work. His first book was Chasing the Scream, The First and Last Days of the War on Drugs, and was recently adapted into the Oscar-nominated film, The United States Against Billie Holiday. That's what we all aspire to have a Hollywood adaptation of our work. His second book, Lost Connections, Uncovering the Real Causes of Depression and the Unexpected Solutions, was described by the British Journal of General Practice as one of the most important texts of recent years. And if you can get doctors agreeing with you, you're doing something right. But this one, Stolen Focus, is very much still a book about which we are still writing and which the history books will still be coming in to judge. I think it's a deeply important book. I found it really hard to read because you got me from the beginning and you told me I needed to pay attention. So all of a sudden I couldn't speed read it. I couldn't skim it. I only got it recently, so I've been reading it every morning and evening and trying to really give it the attention that it deserved. So
I'm really touched by that. Thank you.
A magnificent read. Sometimes painful. Sometimes it really gets one to think about, maybe I'm not living my life right as a person or a parent. But it was worth it. It was really worth it. And I think it really does speak very deeply to our societal challenges and the challenges we face as individuals. So it was superb, and congratulations.
Oh, I'm really moved by what you said. Thank you.
So one of the things I love about the book is it takes us to a variety of locations. We go to Moscow and London and Melbourne and Sydney and Provincetown, which is a little town I've spent some time in.
You've been to P-Town.
So let's start at the beginning. You write this book about our inability to focus, and you do a kind of method acting where you go into Provincetown for 3 months and try and completely unplug to recapture your own sense of focus. So tell us about that experience. Obviously, it really brings us in at the beginning of the book, but tell us what drove you to do it and what it was like.
I think there was a moment for me that was a real catalyst for the decision to go to Provincetown. So I've got a godson, and when he was 9, he developed this brief but freakishly intense obsession with Elvis Presley. And it was unbelievably cute, partly because he seemed to genuinely not know that impersonating Elvis had become a cheesy cliche. So I think he was literally the last person in the history of the world to do a totally sincere impression of Elvis. And one night, every night actually, when I would tuck him in, he would get me to tell him the story of Elvis's life. Obviously, I tried to skip over the bit where he died on the toilet. And one night, I mentioned Graceland, where Elvis lived. And he said to me, "Oh, Johann, will you take me to Graceland one day?" And I said, "Sure," the way you do with 9-year-olds, knowing next week it'll be Legoland or whatever. And he looked at me really intensely and said, "No, do you promise one day you'll take me to Graceland?" And I said, "I absolutely promise."
But he forgot and you remembered.
Well, I didn't even think of it again for 10 years until just so many things had gone wrong. By the time he was 15, he dropped out of school. And when he was 19, this will sound like an exaggeration, it's not. He spent literally almost all his waking hours alternating between his iPad, his iPhone, his laptop. His life was just this blur of WhatsApp, YouTube, pornography. And it was almost like he was kind of whirring at the speed of Snapchat, you know, when nothing still or serious could touch him. And one day we were sitting on my sofa in London, and I'd been trying to get a conversation going with him all day, and I couldn't. And to be totally honest with you, I wasn't that much better, you know. I was staring at my own devices. And I suddenly remembered this moment. And I said to him, "Hey, let's go to Graceland." And he looked at me completely blankly. And I reminded him, and I said, "Let's break this numbing routine. Let's go on a big road trip all over the south." But I was suddenly thinking ahead. I thought, "You've got to promise me if we go, you'll leave your phone in the hotel during the day. Because there's no point in us going if you're just going to stare at your phone the whole time." And he took a moment, he really thought about it, and he said, "Yeah, I want to do this, let's do it." I think it was literally like 2, maybe 3 weeks later, we took off from Heathrow to New Orleans, where we went first. And a couple of weeks after that, we got to Graceland. And when you get to Graceland now, this is even before COVID, there's no one to show you around. What happens is they hand you an iPad, you put in the earbuds, and the iPad shows you around. It says, go left, go right. It tells you a story about the room you're in. And every room you go in, there's an image of that room on the iPad in front of you. So what happens, it's a really weird thing, is everyone just walks around Graceland staring at their iPad. And I'm just watching this, getting a bit annoyed by it. And I say, "Oh no, sometimes people do look away from the iPad. They do it to take out their phone, take a selfie, and move right away, and they go back to the screen." And we got to the jungle room. That was Elvis's favourite room in Graceland. It's got loads of fake plants in it that have frankly seen better days. And I'll never forget it. There was a Canadian couple next to us. And the man turned to his wife and he said, "Honey, this is amazing. Look, if you swipe left, you can see the jungle room to the left. And if you swipe right, you can see the jungle room to the right." And I thought he was joking. So I laughed out loud. And I just stood and watched them. And they were just swiping back and forth. And I couldn't restrain myself. I leaned forward and I said, "But hey, sir,
You're in the jungle room.
you don't have to do it." Like, there's an old-fashioned form of swiping. It's called turning your head, because we're literally in the jungle room, right? You don't have to look at a digital representation of it. And they looked at me like I was completely deranged, possibly correctly, and backed out the room. And I turned to my godson to laugh about it. And he was standing in the corner staring at Snapchat, because from the minute we landed, he just couldn't stop. He couldn't stop. And I went up to him and I did that thing that's never a good idea. I'm sure as a teacher you're tempted to do. Sometimes I tried to grab the phone out of his hands. And I said to him, "Look, I know you're afraid of missing out, but this is guaranteeing that you'll miss out. You're not showing up at your own life. You're not present at the events of your own existence." And he stormed off, understandably. And I wandered around Memphis on my own that day, and I found him that night by the Heartbreak Hotel, in the Heartbreak Hotel where we were staying. And he was sitting by the big guitar-shaped swimming pool, and I went up to him and I apologised for getting so angry. And he was looking at Snapchat, and he didn't look up from his phone, but he said, "I know something's really wrong here, and I don't know what it is." And I sort of realised in that moment, we went away to get away from this problem of distraction, but it felt like there was nowhere to escape to.
Yeah, it followed you.
Exactly, because it seemed to that's the better way of putting it than I would have. Exactly right. And I remember coming back, and at that time, I had in my head what I now realise were 2 really oversimplified stories about why this was happening. In my case, because my own attention was getting worse as well, I thought, well, the first story was, "You're weak. There's something wrong with you. Why can't you resist this?" And the second story was, someone invented the smartphone, and that screwed me over, right?
And that's kind of what, you say you went to Provincetown, where one of your biggest, challenges was, how do I unplug? And you went to these extreme lengths to get an old man's phone that would, send you a beep if you fell over but couldn't connect you to the internet, which I loved as a story. And the bemusement of the sales clerk, who was sort of like, you really don't want to buy this device, but you did. And you go there and you have 3 months of trying to go on your own journey. And one of the things I want to talk about is, this idea that we are all trapped in this experience and it's not an individual failing. So I think that's a really deeply poignant but important insight of the book. But you go there, you unplug.
Yeah, I had no laptop that could get online. I had no smartphone.
Connection.
Yeah.
And it sounds like it was a really important journey for you, which is it started as kind of euphoric and then you felt really deep deprivation and sadness, but then you came through that and found sort of healing and a new sense of purpose and reflection in the process.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to, it's funny because Provincetown, so you don't need to say this, but for people who don't know Provincetown, it's a place in Cape Cod. It's a little kind of gay resort town. It's the kind of place where more than one person ends up full-time living by dressing as Ursula, the villain from The Little Mermaid, and singing songs about cunnilingus. It's a great place. Initially, the first week was like this kind of haze of decompression, and relief. I felt like I had been followed around ever since the invention of the smartphone by a kind of parade that's constantly shouting and yelling and banging cymbals, and suddenly it was like the parade had gone away and I could just sort of sit quietly, and there was a tremendous relief. I almost felt kind of stoned with relief. And then I had this really lovely period of like starting to think a bit more deeply, and then I had this just disastrous crash. I remember walking down the beach in the west end of Provincetown and seeing loads of people on the beach with their phones, and it was driving me crazy because, again, Provincetown is, well, as you know, one of the most beautiful places in the world, and people were not looking at it. They were using it as a kind of backdrop, almost like it was a film set for their Instagram.
Like the Jungle Room all over again.
Exactly. But this time, instead of being, put your phone away, look at the world, isn't it amazing? I was like, I wanted to go, give me that phone, mine, right? I wanted to snap, and I realised...
You wanted to be part of it again.
Exactly. Well, this is a pretentious way of putting it, but I found myself thinking about, Simone de Beauvoir wrote that when she became an atheist, it was like the world had gone silent. And I realised being deprived of the internet made me feel like the world had gone silent. I had spent so long all through the day getting these kind of thin, insistent signals from the internet. And when they were gone, it was this peculiar...
It was empty, almost.
Yeah, exactly. That's the word. And then I realised, okay, it's not enough to just separate yourself. You created a vacuum. You now need to fill that vacuum with the things that are meaningful to you. And and I succeeded in doing that in all sorts of ways we can talk about. But I remember at the end of my time in Provincetown, the thing that most stunned me is after that initial dip, how much my attention came back. Because also the other story I had was, I was nearly 40. I thought, well, maybe my attention's got worse because I've gotten older. My attention went back to being as good as it had been when I was 17. I was amazed by how well I could focus on reading, on having proper long conversations with people. It was a really profoundly moving experience for me. And I remember at the end of my time in Provincetown, I remember the very last day I was there, I went to the point, where you can get that point at the end of Provincetown where you can look back over the whole town, beyond the lighthouse. And I remember looking at it and thinking, God, why would I ever go back to how I was before? This is amazing, right? I would say to anyone listening or watching, think about anything you've ever achieved in your life that you're proud of, whether it's starting a business, being a good parent, learning to play the guitar, whatever it is. That thing that you're proud of required a huge amount of sustained focus and attention. And when your ability to pay attention breaks down, your ability to achieve your goals breaks down, your ability to solve your problems breaks down, you feel less competent because you actually are less competent. And getting my attention back was a feeling of getting my competence back. And the next day I got the ferry back to Boston. My friend Shailene gave me back my laptop and my proper phone, my smartphone. And within 2 months I was 80% back to where I'd been. And I felt this real despair. I was like, God, what's why has this happened? I only really began to understand it when I went to Moscow to interview Dr. James Williams, who used to be at the heart of the Silicon Valley machine, that's played such a key role in doing this to us, along with 11 other factors that I write about. And he kind of quit in horror. He's become, I would argue, the leading philosopher of attention in the world. He lives in Moscow because his wife
he works for the World Health Organization.
Yeah, his wife works for the World Health Organization. They've left now, obviously, because of the Ukraine situation. But and I remember him saying to me, "Well, the mistake you've made, Johann, is it's like thinking the solution for air pollution is for you personally to wear a gas mask, right? Not against gas masks. If I lived in Beijing, I'd wear one of those pollution masks. It's not a solution to air pollution. The solution to air pollution is to actually deal...
Structural.
Exactly, to deal with the source." And he said we need to do something similar with attention. And I don't think I fully understood it then. It was only kind of later, a big part of the journey, that I really began to understand what he meant.
So the book tells us that attention is important, individually and socially, and that we've lost it. And for, not just one reason, but as you say, 12 reasons, all of which interlock and are pretty complicated. But before I get to James and his notion of attention, I love the image he captures of different forms of light and your addendum to it. Just tell us again, why does attention matter so much? It matters individually, as you say, for a sense of efficacy and self-efficacy. But you also have this lovely sort of argument that our societal capacity for attention has diminished, and that affects our ability to tackle some of our most pressing challenges like climate change. Are you motivated by the individual, the collective, or all of it in trying to get us to pay attention again?
Well, I think exactly what you're alluding to, those different layers of attention that Dr. Williams has talked about, I think really help us to think about the different ways in which attention is important. And it led me to thinking also about the what I think is maybe the most important layer, which is the collective one. So he argues that attention is like a kind of light, which is it really helped me to think about it. And he argues there's 3 layers. I would argue there's 4, and I know he agrees with this when I suggest put it to him. So the first layer is what we generally think about when we think about attention problems, and it's what he calls our spotlight. It comes from William James, the founder of modern American psychology. So it goes back to the 1890s, this image. So the spotlight image is, your spotlight. So think about this room, right? So we're in a room now. There's lights. I can see, if I turn my head, I can see the people in the control room. I know that my phone is somewhere in the control room. There's a nice guy behind the camera wearing a mask. There's all sorts of things. I can slightly hear a buzzing sound if I zone out. I'm narrowing down. I'm filtering all of that out, and I'm narrowing my spotlight down to you. What did you just ask me? Oh yeah, you asked me about that. Okay, so I've narrowed my spotlight down to you. So your spotlight is your ability to narrow down all the stimuli you're exposed to one thing and attend to it in the short term. And so when we think about attention problems, we often think, an obvious example would be, I go to the fridge to get a Coke Zero. On the way there, my friend Rob texts me. I start looking at the text, I'm like, oh, what's wrong here? I start replying. And I'm standing in the middle of my kitchen. Exactly. And I've just forgotten why I went to the fridge, and I come back and I don't have my Diet Coke, right?
No Rob.
So we all know those things are happening all the time, right? And so that would be a disruption to your spotlight. It's a disruption to your ability to achieve an immediate short-term task. And when we think about distraction, that's generally what we think of. Oh God, I wanted to get this, but I couldn't get that because I got that. And then someone interrupted me and I was trying to do this, and wait, what did you ask me again? It's that kind of distraction.
Which has the most immediate sort of instrumental payoff, right? Educationally, work, productivity, economically, but it's the most immediate and instrumental. But part of what you're interested in is these other layers.
Well, exactly. And you must be seeing that initial level of distraction in lectures and things. Do you see that a lot, or?
Well, I think, students are grappling with all of the challenges you talk about. So you say, what's undermining our spotlight? Lack of sleep, stress, the pandemic, distractions from technology. All of those things are very real. But, there are different ways of teaching at both class size and interaction, and the different ways in which we engage people and build community can help overcome it. But absolutely, it's a challenge for all of us. So that's our spotlight. Take us up.
The next level up is what he calls your starlight. And that's not your ability to achieve an immediate short-term task like I want to get a Coke from the fridge. That's a longer-term task like I want to write this term paper, I want to set up a business, I want to be a good parent, whatever it might be.
Write a good book.
Exactly, read my book. So that is a longer-term goal. It's called your starlight. because when you're lost in the desert and you don't have GPS, you look to the stars to figure out where you're meant to, what direction you're heading in, right? And he argues that, I think very persuasively and powerfully, that if your spotlight is disrupted enough, your starlight begins to be disrupted. You don't just lose your ability, you don't just see a diminishment in your ability to achieve a short-term goal, you see a diminishment in your ability to achieve your longer-term goals. I think we can all feel that happening.
So one of the things, I was getting kind of depressed reading the book because I was like, oh, wow, we live in an age in which we are being fragmented in this kind of way that's really hard for us as individuals to overcome. But you talk about the sort of psychology of flow and how there's one view of human agency which is often associated with the psychologist Skinner, that is, we are very limited in our agencies and we are, very manipulated by our context. But you talk to this Claremont professor, Malin, about flow and how if one can identify a purpose that has meaning and approach it in a way that has the right level of focus, we can have a great sense of self-efficacy. And so I guess Starlight is about flow, right? Without Starlight, we don't have flow. And part of what you achieved in Provincetown was flow. And it's what we can all, in the individual sense, aspire to after reading this book is, that flow is not the same as hedonic experience. It's not always about fun. It's about a sense of purpose and self-efficacy. And I do think the book really brings us back to that in a way I think is very powerful.
Oh, thank you. I mean, I think there's a thing about, remind me just to, in a minute, say about the other two.
Yeah, we're going to layer
layers.
up, don't worry.
But the, the stuff about flow, I found really helpful. So everyone listening and watching will have experienced a flow state, even if they've never heard that term.
Yeah.
So a flow state is when you're doing something and you just get really into it. And your sense of ego falls away, your sense of time falls away. It's like a zoom, you're in the zone. And then when it ends, you're a bit like, wow, that went quickly. I got a lot done, right? The way one rock climber put it is if you're in flow when you're rock climbing, it's like you are the rock you're climbing. And flow is really important for the debate about attention because flow is both the deepest form of attention that people can provide. And once you're in it, it's the easiest form of attention to provide. It's not like, memorizing facts for an exam, like what year did Abraham Lincoln die? What year did Federation happen? It's not like that. You're just, it flows effortlessly. So I wanted to figure out if this is a gusher of attention that exists inside all of us, where do we drill to get it?
How do we channel it? Yeah.
Exactly. So I went to go and see Professor Mahali Csikszentmihalyi. It took me so long to learn how to say that. I'm going to say his name repeatedly just to prove I can.
It's a great name and that you can.
He's a great person as well. But I went to interview him. So he was the man who discovered, as you know, flow states, and he was one of the most important psychologists of the 20th century, and he spent more than 60 years studying flow states. I'm pretty sure I did the last interview he ever did because he died, sadly, shortly afterwards. And Professor Csikszentmihalyi learned a huge number of things and discovered a huge number of things about flow states. But for your students and anyone watching, I think there's 3 things in particular that can really help them if they're trying to figure out if they want to try to get into a flow state, maximize their chances. It's no guarantee, but you can really increase the odds. So there's 3 things. Firstly, you've got to choose one goal and set aside a significant amount of time in which you're just going to pursue that one goal and not do anything else. If you're switching all the time between tasks, you won't get into flow. So you've got to be like, okay, this afternoon I'm going to paint this canvas, I'm going to write this essay, I'm going to do this gardening, whatever it might be, right? So one goal. Secondly, you've got to make sure it's a goal that's meaningful to you, right? Attention evolved to attach to meaning. A frog will stare longer at a fly than at a stone because the fly is meaningful to the frog and the stone is not, right? So we evolved to, it's one of the reasons, by the way, so many kids are struggling to focus in our schools because we're getting them to learn things that are meaningless to them for tests that are in fact meaningless.
It's either meaningless or we failed to explain to them
exactly.
why it has meaning.
Yeah, we haven't infused it with meaning for them, exactly.
Yeah.
We haven't helped them to build. It's not, I don't think history, geography and maths are meaningless, but if we haven't, if their experience of it is just rote learning it for a test, then that will be meaningless to them. So it's got to be something that's meaningful. And thirdly, and this to me felt a bit counterintuitive, though I suspect you as a teacher, you'll be seeing this all the time, is it really helps to maximise your chances of getting into flow if you push yourself to the edge of your comfort zone, the edge of your abilities, but not beyond it. So let's say you're a rock climber. You don't want a medium talent rock climber. you don't just want to try and climb over your garden wall. It's too easy. You won't get into flow. Equally, you don't want to try and suddenly climb Mount Everest tomorrow. That's going to be too overwhelming. You want to climb a slightly higher and harder rock face than the one you did last time. So flow begins at the edge of your comfort zone. If you push yourself to the edge of your abilities, but not beyond it, which is a difficult thing to gauge. Yeah. Then you maximise your chances. Because you do these three things: narrow down to one goal, make sure it's a meaningful goal, push yourself to the edge of your abilities. You maximise your chances of accessing this deep form of attention. But even as I say that, you can see how the way we're living is currently undermining our ability to get into flow. Even that first step. Just do one thing. Okay, if you're being interrupted by text messages, you're not doing one thing, right? It's going to jolt you out of that process of getting into flow.
Let's come back to sort of how we can re-find our flow. But I think just the idea of it is very interesting. And, you know, you give credit to the way in which we are both manipulated and capable of working for flow. You know, I think it helps understand that we are all diverse people and our particular goal and sense of meaning will differ. So I was talking to a friend on the weekend who's gone from running marathons to ultra marathons, and I'm a 4K kind of person. I'm like, you know, I don't need to do 100K to feel, you know, at the edge of my ability. I'm comfortable with one lap. But understanding how different people need to be pushed and where that limit is.
Yeah, the only time I've ever run anywhere is when I thought KFC was about to close in 1996. I got there, still an hour to go, so a complete waste of time that was. But yeah, so that's definitely not how I get into my flow, but I admire it nonetheless.
And, you know, I think I've done some reading about cognitive behavioural therapy, and when one's talking about anxiety and panic disorders, there's a similar resonance there of, you know, if one pushes oneself beyond one's limit, it can just trigger further anxiety. But if you can expose yourself up to and just at your comfort zone level, you can make real progress. And so that for all of us, it's about finding meaning, but also being, you know, really realistic about what our limits are and what our capacities are in a way I thought it's really, really interesting. So we've got spotlight, which is kind of intuitive, paying attention to a task. There's the next level up, which is starlight, which is knowing what goals we want to set ourselves and how we get there. But above starlight is daylight, and you know, daylight is this much more capacious form of thinking. Tell us how you define it, and I really want to ask you about the connection to daydreaming, because I think in the book you really closely connect daylight and daydreaming.
Yes, I was just Dr. Williams is supposed to come up with this, and is such a great person. And so the your daylight is not your ability to achieve a longer term goal, but your ability to even know what your longer term goals are. How do you know you want to write a book? How do you know you want to set up a business? How do you know what it means to be a good parent? To do those things, you have to have periods of rest, of reflection, of daydreaming, which we'll talk about more, mind wandering. If you're just jammed up all the time, if you never have moments of rest, relaxation, deeper thought, how do you even figure out what these things are? So he argues that it's called your daylight because you can see a room most clearly when it's flooded in daylight. And he argues that just our ability to see clearly in those moments of thought and reflection are being profoundly disrupted. He argues that in its most extreme form, it leads to a kind of decohering in people, where you're just harder to make sense of, tell a story about yourself and make sense of your life. And I think that's really true. And it relates to, in part, I mean, there's many aspects of it, but it relates, as you say, in part to this huge explosion that there's been in the science of daydreaming, which has really emerged in the last, or mind wandering rather, and there's debate about the difference between them, in the last 20 years, from people like Professor Jonathan Smallwood at York University, who I interviewed, or Professor Nathan Sprang at McGill University in Montreal, who I also interviewed, where I mean, I thought about this a lot at Provincetown, because I remember about a month into Provincetown, you know, I went there partly because I wanted to read so much, because it's always been like one of the greatest joys of my life. And I'd brought with me, obviously I couldn't listen to audio.
Didn't have a device, yeah.
So I'd brought with me an iPod, which was funny. People would see it in Provincetown, which I'd loaded up before I went. People would look at it like it was some kind of... I remember how futuristic iPods seemed when I first got one, and it looked like something from Noah's Ark. Yeah, exactly. But and it's funny, I remember whenever I had these noise-cancelling headphones, whenever I would turn them on, it would always say, searching for Johann's iPhone, searching for Johann's... And it would go, connection cannot be made. And it felt very ominous.
You felt sad, yeah.
But initially I would walk around listening to these preloaded podcasts and audiobooks, and then a little while in, I started just going for walks, and just leaving the iPod behind. And I remember first thinking, oh, this is not what you came here to do. You came here to focus more. This is self-indulgence, right? Get a sense of how internally critical my voice is. But I started to realise these long walks were actually often the most creative moments of my day. I was starting to have loads of ideas for different things. I was starting to think more deeply, starting to see connections between things. And I was a bit puzzled by that until after Provincetown, I went to interview all these experts and read their work very deeply. And it turns out, so we think of mind wandering, we're taught as children that mind wandering is a bad thing. The worst.
It's the opposite of spotlight.
Exactly. And well, if teachers are very often, he's not doing well, he just daydreams in class all day, right? But in fact, the scientific evidence on this, the emerging scientific field about this, discovered when we're just mind wandering, actually, many of our most important thought processes happen. Mind wandering is where you start to make connections between things that you didn't see the connection between before, often the font of creativity. It's why a lot of scientists and novelists and other artistic people will tell you, oh, I sat at my desk for 10 hours, I couldn't see the solution, I went for a walk and it came to me, right? So it's important for connection and creativity. It's important when you daydream or mind wander, that's often how you process the past. It's often how you anticipate the future. Is a really important. So mind wandering is actually a form of focus.
It's just at a different level.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. That's exactly it. And so I've tried to integrate that into my sort of everyday life. Now, wherever I am in the world, I always take at least an hour where I go for a walk with no phone, no iPod, nothing to distract me. And that is almost always my most creatively fertile hour in the day. So yeah, and I think this relates very much to Dr. Williams's typology, because you can sort of see, it's often in that hour that you start to make sense to yourself. Sometimes you'll go, why did I do that? Why did I do that? It's because of that. And why did he say that thing that upset me? Oh, I get it. It's actually because he was feeling bad about this. And it's often those moments where if you don't do that, if you're just sort of bashing through life and you don't get those moments where you stop and go, oh, that kind of makes sense. You feel more brittle. You feel more anxious. I actually find it incredibly calming after. Not always. Sometimes if you're very het up, it can actually be quite anxiety provoking to not have anything to distract you. So I don't want to overstate it, but very often it's a crucial period of my day for things making sense in the end.
Well, you've clearly kept something from Provincetown. You say you've got back to 80% in an hour of...
That was initially. I got a lot better. I'd sort of say that as if it was a graph. It's like hugely went up during Provincetown, went back after, and then obviously I go on this scientific journey and I learned lots of the things we can do as individuals and as a society. So I'd say now I would say I'm maybe... I've got 60% of what I had in Provincetown, which is pretty good given the environment we live in.
Absolutely. So then the last layer of light is one that isn't Dr. Williams but you, which is stadium light, which is the sort of macro perspective on our society and our connection as a community. And that's what you suggest is in some ways really important for collective attention to our common problems. So how is technology disrupting the stadium light? I love the story you tell. I mean, it's a terrible story, but it's a great story about Facebook and its incentives to keep us apart. So what role is technology playing in disrupting our stadium light? Yeah,
your stadium lights, I would argue, are our ability to see each other and to formulate collective goals. It's not just our individual attention that's collapsing, it's our collective attention. I don't think it's a coincidence that we're having the biggest crisis in democracy since the 1930s at the same time as this huge attention crisis. Certainly not the only reason. That would be an absurd thing to say, but I think it is a significant factor. And when countries as different as Britain, Brazil and Burma are all going crazy in similar ways, polarising on similar trend lines, I think that does tell you something about underlying mechanisms. So I think to understand this, and to me I actually think of all the... Look, obviously many of the things I write about in the book are really close to my heart and really important. I think this is the most important of all. I think a species that attention is our superpower. a species that loses its superpower at the time of its greatest challenges, like the climate crisis, that's not good, right? I've been thinking about it a lot, obviously being here in Australia, given what everyone here has been through, from the Black Summer to this terrible flooding that's happening now, and also the very encouraging result in the election where climate change was finally prioritised. So I think this is so important, and to understand one of the mechanisms by which this attention crisis and the factors driving it are profoundly damaging our ability to deal with any collective problem. I think you have to understand some of the mechanisms about how social media currently works and what we can do about that. So at the moment, anyone watching, please don't, but if you open TikTok or Facebook or Twitter and start to scroll, you need to understand that those companies begin to make money out of you immediately in two ways. First way is really obvious. You see ads. Okay, no one needs me to tell them about that. Second way is much more important. Everything you do on those apps is scanned and sorted by the artificial intelligence algorithms. Everything you say, everything you like, everything you do. And they're doing that in order to figure out what the weaknesses in your attention are. What is it that keeps you scrolling, right? So different people, it's different things. For me, it would be a mixture of Noam Chomsky quotes and pictures of shirtless men. I don't know what it is for you. Whatever it is, they are figuring out what are the things that keep you scrolling.
And this is what you call surveillance capitalism.
Yeah, it's a term from Professor Shoshana Zuboff at Harvard, an amazing and wonderful person. And the reason for this is very simple, and this was explained to me by people in Silicon Valley who have been at the heart of the machinery doing this to us. And it's for a very simple reason. Every time you pick up your phone and open these apps, those companies start to make money out of you. The longer you scroll, because you see more ads, the more money they make from the advertisers. Every time you close the app, that revenue stream disappears. Every time your kid opens their phone and starts to scroll through these apps, the longer they scroll, the more money they make. Every time they close it, the revenue stream disappears. So, and it seemed to me almost bizarrely simplistic, but this is how everyone kept explaining it to me, and it's, when you look at the evidence, it's clear. The sole driver, the whole machinery in Silicon Valley is geared towards one thing, which is figuring out how do we get you to open the app as often as possible and scroll as long as possible. Just like the head of KFC, the only thing he cares about in his professional capacity is, did you go to KFC today? If you did, how big was the bucket you bought? You have such a glowingly healthy look. I'm sure you don't ever go there, but unlike me. But in the same way, all they care about is how often did you pick up the app, how long did you scroll, because that is how they make money. Now that has combined with something else, which is leading to a disaster for our politics. So you've got a business model, as Professor Zuboff says, surveillance capitalism, that's premised on getting you to scroll more and more and more. And those algorithms were just trying to figure out neutrally, they don't care what it is, they figure out what is it that makes people scroll more. Yeah. And those algorithms bumped into an unfortunate human truth, which has been known about by psychologists for, 70 years, which is called negativity bias. And everyone watching experiences negativity bias. Negativity bias is just, you will stare longer at something that makes you upset or angry than you will at something that makes you feel good. If anyone who's ever seen a car accident, you know exactly what I mean. You stared longer at the bloody car wreck than you did at the pretty flowers on the other side of the street, right? Yeah. This is very deep in human nature. 10-week-old babies will stare longer at an angry face than a smiling face. It's probably for a good reason in our evolution.
It's probably survival instinct, yeah.
Yeah, our ancestors who weren't looking out for the angry stuff
got eaten by a lion, so yeah.
Exactly. So, but when this combines, when you've got a combination of algorithms figuring out what keeps people scrolling, combined with negativity bias, what it discovered is, if we feed people things that make them angry and upset, that will get them to scroll longer than if we feed them things that make them feel good. So picture two teenage girls who go to the same party and leave and go home on the same bus. And one of them does a TikTok video or a Facebook update or whatever it might be, saying, you know what, it was a really nice party. I had a great time. Everyone looked lovely. What a night. And the other girl goes, Karen was a total skank at that party. Her boyfriend's an asshole. Just does an angry rant. I spend too much time with my niece trying to navigate social media with her, so I'm too familiar with these terms. What will happen is the algorithms scan both. They pick up both. They're looking for the kind of language you use. It'll put the first update into a few people's feeds. It'll put the second update into far more people's feeds. Because if it's enraging, it's engaging, right? Farm will go, what do you mean Karen's a skank? You're a skank. You know, you can see how, whereas the first one, it's just like, oh, yeah, nice night.
Yeah,
nice.
done.
We know that's bad enough at the level of 2 teenage girls on a bus. We all know what's happened to teenage girls' mental health.
Yeah.
The disastrous effect. But imagine a whole society being plugged into that. Oh, no, wait, you don't have to imagine it. Because that's what's been happening to us, right? Enraging. And it's funny, in some ways it's easy to think about that in relation to Trump and Brexit, but I actually found it easiest. In a way, they're a bit too close to me, I'm sure to you. I don't want to make assumptions about your political preferences. I actually found it easier to see it in relation to Brazil, where I've spent a fair bit of time, which is obviously not my country and not a place I care about, but not a place that I'm especially kind of close to. And think about it there. So Jair Bolsonaro, the current monstrous far-right president of Brazil, hopefully going to be defeated in November, but it may trigger a civil war going down to do it. So if you go back 7-8 years, Bolsonaro, a bit more than that, 10 years, Bolsonaro was a washed-up far-right senator with no credibility of any kind, right? He was a very marginal figure, nostalgic for the military dictatorships of the 70s and 80s, the kind of irrelevance. I mean, I was going to say like Pauline Hanson, but actually more marginal than Pauline Hanson. And then what happened is he began to make escalatingly outrageous comments that were hugely amplified by social media.
The homophobia, sexist stuff that got picked up.
Yeah. He said that he'd rather his son died than was gay. He told during a debate in the Senate about rape, he told several female senators, you don't have to worry about this, you're so ugly, no one's going to rape you. He said that the blacker residents of the favelas were, the sickening phrase he used was not even fit for the zoo, not even good enough for breeding, and should go back to the zoo, that was the phrase he used. Repulsive. These things are hugely amplified by the algorithms, right? Again, not intentionally, but they make people angry. So they're hugely amplified. Bolsonaro gains and gains in support. Although he was kind of he was kind of locked out of the mainstream Brazilian media, he's massively amplified by these algorithms, and he wins the presidency. Again, it's not the only factor, but it's such a significant factor that the night he won at his election rally, his supporters chanted, Facebook, 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 because they knew what an important factor it had been. He then becomes president. He accelerates the destruction of the Amazon rainforest. He accelerates extraordinarily violent repression of minorities within Brazil. He when COVID arrives, he tells people to take it like a man.
Yeah, well, he denies its existence and then gets it himself. But let's just think about, though, part of the challenge, which is you tell us at the beginning of the book that one of the problems is the speed at which information is hitting us. We live in Thomas Friedman said the world is flat. You say the world is fast. It's this sense of relentless information, and social media just makes it so much worse. But one solution, which is to start tuning out and to, push back, can create the kind of polarized information sort of, separation, the acoustic separation between left and right we see in the United States, that Brazil, there are people who are Bolsonaro supporters who have not heard any counter evidence to the pack of lies and kind of hate that he has been peddling. And so isn't one of the dangers for democracy that as we encourage people to pull back and, go slower, that we don't encourage a kind of retreat to smaller enclaves of safe, enforcing information that just is a feedback loop of confirmatory bias?
I think this is such an important point, and it's why for all of the 12 factors that I write about in Stolen Focus that are harming our attention, there are two levels at which we need to respond, I think. I think of them as defense and offense. There are loads of things we need to do to defend ourselves and our children as individuals. But you're absolutely right. It comes back to the gas mask analogy. You can wear a gas mask to protect yourself from air pollution, but you're surrounded by other people being exposed to air pollution. And, I don't believe, although I'm in favour of it, the ultimate solution is not for you and me to retreat into safer enclaves of cleaner air, right? The political equivalent of cleaner air. Because you can, you can just read the New York Times every day. Not that the New York Times is so perfect, but it's
pretty good.
better than algorithm. I mean, I would urge people to also read Manufacturing Consent by Noam Chomsky to see why there's lots of problems with the New York Times. But it's a lot better than, Alex Jones and the garbage that's been promoted by the algorithms. We can do that, but if we're in a society that's going crazy because everyone else is being exposed to this garbage, if I can do that and congratulate myself on my purity while Britain is pulled out of the European Union, right? That you can see you can do that while Scott Morrison is appointing himself to 5 random ministries and not telling anyone. That's ultimately not the solution. The solution is to actually go. There's defense, and the solution, which we have to do clearly. But equally, we have to go on offense. We have to deal with the factors that are doing this to us. And that can sound very big and very insurmountable. But actually, I left quite optimistic in many ways. So if you think about, obviously, the tech component, which is one of the 12 factors that I write about in the book, that are harming our attention, actually go very widely from the food we eat to the way we work, to the way our schools work, to the air we breathe. There's a whole array of things. But I think about it in relation to tech. It was fascinating talking to people in Silicon Valley about this, and lots of them saying to me, well, look, the solution is kind of clear. And it took a long time of them explaining it to me before I really understood this. So Asa Raskin, for example, who invented a key part of how most websites work, and his dad, Jeff Raskin, actually invented the Apple Macintosh for Steve Jobs. Asa said to me, look, there's a solution to this element of it. It's pretty simple. You've got to ban the current business model. You've got to ban surveillance capitalism.
Yeah.
Exactly. You've got to say that a business model based on secretly surveilling people in order to hack and invade their attention
is illegal.
It's just immoral. We don't allow leaded petrol anymore. We don't allow
asbestos.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's exactly. It's an intellectual equivalent of asbestos. It's an attentional equivalent of asbestos. We won't allow it. It's wrong. And we're saying to Asa and lots of the other people like Jaron Lanier who said this to me. Okay, so what happens the next day? Let's say we do that and I open Facebook. Would it just say, sorry guys, we've gone fishing? He said, of course not. What would happen is we would have to move to a different business model. And almost everyone watching will have experience of the 2 alternative business models. So the first is subscription. Everyone knows how Netflix works. You pay a certain amount, you get access. The key thing is, if you do that, all the incentives change.
They want to give you good content, not prey on your weaknesses.
That's a really good way of putting it, because at the moment, all the incentives, if you're any of these companies, your job is to figure out, okay, what are the weaknesses in Bob's attention so that we can hack Bob and sell his attention to the advertisers, because Bob isn't the customer.
No.
You're not the customer of Facebook or Twitter or TikTok. Your attention is the product they sell to the real customer, who's the advertiser. But if you move to a different model, and there's another one as well I'll talk about in a minute, but if you move to a different model, suddenly you become the customer. Bob becomes the customer. Suddenly I have to go, what does Bob want? Oh, it turns out Bob doesn't want to spend his life scrolling. Bob wants to meet up with his friends offline. Okay, let's design our app to maximize people meeting up offline, right? Technology to exist that can be done tomorrow.
Tell us quickly about the other model, and then I want to ask, I'm a young person, I'm listening, I want to go and, storm the Capitol and demand this, and what are the political economy challenges to getting it done?
Yeah, so in terms of the other option, again, literally everyone has experience of this watching. So before we had sewers, we had feces in the street, people got cholera, it was terrible. So we all pay to build and maintain the sewers together. So you own the sewers in Sydney, I own the sewers in London.
It's a public utility.
Exactly, we publicly own it. Now, it might be that we want to own the sewage pipes together. We might want to own the information pipes together because we're getting the equivalent of cholera for our attention and our politics. Now, you want to be very careful. That would have to be independent of government. I think a good model would be the BBC, the most trusted media organisation in the world, which is, everyone in Britain who has a television pays a licence fee. The BBC works for the British people. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. And they're accountable to us and they're not accountable to the government, right? So you'd want to maybe some form of public ownership independent of government. But whatever alternative model we choose, the key thing is that it would be all the incentives change. For as long as the incentives for these social media companies are to hack your attention, our attention will continue to get worse, right? And they are really, really good at it. As my friend Tristan Harris, who's been at the heart of Google, says, you can try having self-control, but every time you do, there's 10,000 engineers on the other side of the screen undermining your self-control, right? So we've got to deal with that.
So, that point about the 10,000 people on the other side gets us to what might be called cruel optimism, the idea that individuals can't necessarily fix this. But I do want to talk a bit about the individual solutions. First, I just want to say about some of the other structural solutions that you propose, which I think are very interesting. You talk about, obviously, the lack of sleep, stress, how our week, our day, and every hour of our working life is kind of compressed and stressed in ways that undermine our attention. So obviously you put, premiums on sick and holiday leave, on the possibility of a 4-day work week as offering some respite from this. And of course, that really is going to require sustained mobilisation, including, by unions and other labour rights organisations. The end of the book, which you say is a little bit optimistic, and you say, well, if we can ban coal, we can do anything. I wanted to ask you, though, about how that connects to your opening claim that we can't pay attention politically, right? So aren't we trapped in this vortex of we can't sustain attention? The political economy of the situation is such that, fossil fuel companies and big tech push back so hard politically that the political solutions are out of reach, and then we lose sight of them and we lose attention and we're defeated. So how can we maintain optimism about a 4-day work week, or better leave and terms and conditions, or banning surveillance capitalism, given how entrenched their political power is, as well as their hold on our attention and our weakness of attention?
So when I feel pessimistic, I think, a bit like in an analogy with the climate debate, there's certain points in the breakdown of the climate where you get into feedback loops, and it becomes impossible to go back, or even to hold yourself at the current level. So when I feel pessimistic, I think we crossed that threshold with attention? Has attention broken down so much that we can't summon the attention to fight to get it back? I don't know, but my instinct is that I don't think that's the case. And when I feel, and that we can actually fight for the slightly jokingly in the book, call it an attention rebellion. Yesterday I was in Melbourne, and I saw got chatted to some fantastic Extinction Rebellion protesters outside the Parliament there, who were fighting against the logging that's happening in Victoria. The reason I'm optimistic, this might sound like a strange thing to say, when I feel pessimistic about this, I think about my grandmothers, who I really loved. I was raised by one of my grandmothers because my mother was ill when I was a child and my dad was in a different country. My grandmothers were the age I am now in 1963. One of them was a working class Scottish woman whose job was to clean toilets. She was raising 3 kids on her own because her husband had died. And the other one was what would then have been called a Swiss peasant woman living in a wooden hut on the side of a mountain. When my grandmothers were the age I am now, neither of them were allowed to have bank accounts because they were married women. They weren't allowed to have bank accounts in their own name. It was legal for their husbands to rape them, as it was legal for men everywhere in the world to rape their wives. I'm conscious I'm a man mansplaining this to you, it's much better than I do. It was in practice legal for their husbands to beat them because the police never did anything about domestic violence. My Swiss grandmother wasn't even allowed to vote, right? And I don't for a minute want to underestimate how much further we've got to go in terms of achieving liberation for women. And
progress is possible, though. That's your point.
Well, I think about my niece's life. And I think about, my niece, my niece Erin is 17. And, she never knew my Swiss grandmother. But sadly, I think she met her when she was a tiny baby. But my Swiss grandmother loved to paint and draw. And when she was a girl, they said to her, shut up, why are you doing it? Put it away. Get into the kitchen. That's your job, right? My niece Erin loves to paint and draw. We started Googling art schools, right? Now, I know my niece is going to face more challenges than my nephews in all sorts of maddening ways. But I think when people sometimes say to me, very understandably, but big tech is so powerful, I would say to them, it's true, it is.
But so is the patriarchy.
It's not 100th as powerful as men were in 1963. In 1963, when my grandmother's the age I am now, men controlled literally every single institution of power in the entire world. Every country, company, police force, not every company, but almost every company, every police force, every military. I mean, there had been almost no female leaders anywhere apart from a few hereditary queens. And I think there's an analogy between the fight for feminism and the fight for attention, so I don't want to overdo the analogy, but I think there's also an analogy where feminism is a fight that had to and still has to happen at so many levels and in so many institutions. It had to happen in every home, in every workplace, in every school, and at a national level. And I think the fight for attention is similar in that way. We have to do it individually, we have to fight in our own lives, in our families, in our workplaces to get our attention back, and we have to fight at a national level. So all sorts of extraordinary transformations are possible that make me optimistic. Think about that I'm gay, right? And again, when I get pessimistic about this,
Think about the change that's happened for LGBTQI plus rights, yeah.
I think specifically about my friend Andrew Sullivan, who lots of your viewers will know. He's a brilliant British-American journalist. And, Andrew, in 1994, Andrew was diagnosed as HIV positive at the height of the AIDS crisis, when, as far as anyone knew, there was no hope in sight. He'd just watched his best friend, Patrick, die of AIDS. And Andrew quit his job and he went to Provincetown to do one last thing before he died, right? He decided to write a book about a crazy utopian idea that no one had ever written a book advocating. The crazy utopian idea he advocated was gay marriage. And when I feel depressed, I try to imagine going back in time to 1994 and saying to Andrew, okay, Andrew, you're not going to believe me, but 26 years from now, you'll be alive. That would have blown his mind. You'll be married to a man. That would have blown his mind. And thirdly, and most importantly, I'll be with you when the Supreme Court of the United States quotes from this book you're writing, when it makes it mandatory for every country in the United States, every state in the United States to introduce gay marriage. And the next day, you'll be invited to a White House lit up in the colours of the rainbow flag to have dinner with the president to celebrate what you and millions of other people have achieved. Oh, and by the way, that president, he's going to be black, right? It would have sounded like the most insane science fiction, but it happened because enough people banded together and fought for it in a spirit of love. If we can do that, we can rescue our attention, but we're going to have to fight for it, and we're going to have to stop blaming ourselves. We are not suffering with our attention because you're weak, I'm weak, our kids are weak. We're suffering for our attention because the book is called Stolen Focus, because our focus is being stolen from us, and we can take it back. But we need to realise we are not medieval peasants begging at the court of King Zuckerberg for a few little crumbs of attention from his table. We are the free citizens of democracies, and we own our own minds, and together we can take them back.
Well, what better way to end? I think that the call to find ways in our own life to unplug, to have more time for reading, for sleeping, for mind wandering is just so powerful. But I love the idea that the deepest lesson of all is political, and we need to have an attention revolution or some such political movement to take back the space that we need to have happy and fulfilling lives and fix the problems of the day. I think you've called us to action, Johann, as well as given us something to make our lives better. Thank you so much for writing this terrific book and for joining us today.
Oh, well, thank you for, and it sounds like an ironic compliment, but thank you for paying so much attention to the book and for all your brilliant questions. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thanks so much. Cheers.
Thank you. This event is presented by the UNSW Centre for Ideas, and to hear upcoming events and podcasts, please subscribe to the UNSW Centre for Ideas newsletter or visit thecentreforideas.com. Thank you and good night.